Imagine a narrow strip of water, just 21 miles wide at its tightest point. And imagine that through this single corridor flows roughly 1/5 of all the oil that keeps the modern world running. Factories in Europe, power grids in Asia, fuel lines across dozens of nations, all of it dependent on ships passing safely through a bottleneck that one country controls from its own shoreline. Now imagine that country closes it, not hypothetically, not as a warning, but right now, today, as a weapon of war. That is the Strait of Hormuz in March of 2026. And what is happening there right now may be the most consequential geopolitical crisis of this generation. To understand how the world arrived at this moment, you have to go back to the late winter of 2025, when the long simmering tension between the United States, Israel, and Iran finally crossed a threshold that no diplomatic back channel could pull it back from. On the 28th of February 2026, American and Israeli forces launched a coordinated military offensive against Iran, a campaign that would come to be known by its operational designation. The strikes were swift and devastating. Within the opening days, Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, was killed. His son, Mojtaba Khamenei, was reportedly injured. The decapitation of Iran's highest leadership tier sent shockwaves through Tehran and through every capital watching from a distance. But this is where things became far more dangerous than even the most pessimistic analysts had predicted. Iran did not collapse. It did not surrender. Instead, it reached for the one weapon it had always kept in reserve, the weapon that no aircraft carrier, no missile battery, and no precision airstrike could easily neutralize. Iran reached for the Strait of Hormuz itself. The geography here is everything. The strait sits between the coast of Iran to the north and the coast of Oman to the south. It is a passage through which approximately 3,000 ships transit every single month. Supertankers carrying crude oil from Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Iraq, Qatar, the UAE, all of them must pass through this corridor to reach the open ocean. There is no realistic alternative. The pipelines that exist can only carry a fraction of the volume. Iran, with its missile batteries positioned along the northern shoreline, its fleet of fast attack boats, its naval mines, and its arsenal of anti-ship missiles, including the Noor, the Qadr, and the Khalij Fars. All of these weapons are pointed directly at that narrow lane of water. When Tehran decided to use them, the effect was almost immediate. Global oil prices surged to their highest levels in 4 years. Daily oil exports from the Gulf region collapsed by at least 60% in a single week. The world's biggest ever supply disruption was no longer a scenario in an economist's risk model. It was happening in real time. And then Donald Trump made a phone call, and another, and another. By the second week of March 2026, President Trump had taken to his social media platform with an unmistakable demand. He called out China, France, Japan, South Korea, and the United Kingdom by name, insisting that they send warships to the Strait of Hormuz. Many countries, especially those affected by Iran's attempted closure, he declared, will be sending warships. The phrasing was telling. He said will be, not should. He was not asking. He was announcing on behalf of nations that had not yet agreed to anything. What happened next revealed a fracture in the Western alliance that may take years to repair. Germany's defense minister stated flatly, "This is not our war, we have not started it." The German foreign minister went further, saying he could not see how NATO had any role or responsibility in the Strait of Hormuz, while pointedly noting that Ukraine remained Europe's top security priority. Italy signaled reluctance. Australia announced it would not be sending ships. Japan said it had no immediate plans. France began quiet diplomatic talks with Tehran about negotiating safe passage for its own vessels rather than joining a military escort mission. Even Britain's Prime Minister, while pledging to work with allies, made clear he would not be drawn into what he carefully described as the wider war. But this is where the situation becomes even more strategically complex. Trump's demand was not just a military request, it carried an explicit threat. Speaking aboard Air Force One, he warned that it would be very bad for the future of NATO if member countries refused to act. "We will remember," he told reporters with the deliberate cadence of a man who meant every word. Here was an American president whose administration had spent 2 years treating NATO allies with suspicion, threatening economic coercion, and musing aloud about whether the alliance was even necessary, now turning around and demanding those same allies enter a war in the Persian Gulf that they had no hand in starting. The irony was not lost on European capitals. Barely 2 months earlier, Trump had told an interviewer that America had never really needed NATO. Now he needed them urgently. Meanwhile, in the waters of the strait itself, the operational reality was sobering. On the 11th of March, a Thai bulk carrier named the Mayuri Nari was struck near the strait, with smoke visible rising from its hull in photographs that circulated globally. It was a reminder that Iranian forces did not need to sink every ship to achieve their strategic objective. They only needed to make every captain, every shipping company, and every insurance underwriter afraid. And fear in maritime commerce translates directly into economic paralysis. Just one successful attack was enough to freeze traffic. The bar to restore confidence was extraordinarily high. Military analysts pointed to a core tactical problem that haunted any coalition planning. The Strait of Hormuz is not open ocean. It is a tightly constrained corridor where Iran holds what strategists call geographic advantage by default. The northern coastline is Iranian territory. The distances involved mean that shore-based missiles and fast attack boats can reach a target before any naval escort vessel has time to intercept. Anti-ship missiles like Iran's Noor travel at subsonic speeds but are fired at close range with devastating accuracy. Iran also possesses significant stockpiles of naval mines, which are notoriously difficult to detect and neutralize in shallow, congested waters. Experts noted that suppressing these threats would require not just naval and air power, it would require boots on the ground along the Iranian coastline. That is not a limited escort mission. That is an invasion. The American military, through CENTCOM Commander Admiral Brad Cooper, framed the ongoing campaign in terms of dismantling Iran's decades-old threat to the free flow of commerce. U.S. jets carried out strikes on Iran's Karg Island oil hub, one of the country's most critical energy infrastructure targets. The Israeli military announced it had destroyed what it described as a senior Iranian state aircraft, an Airbus A340 that had been evacuated to Oman before the strikes began and used to coordinate military procurement and liaison activities. Israel simultaneously announced the beginning of what it called limited and targeted ground operations in southern Lebanon against Hezbollah positions. The conflict, which had begun as a strike campaign against Iran's nuclear program, had become a multi-front war with no defined endpoint. Israel's military publicly stated it anticipated at least 3 more weeks of operations, with thousands of targets remaining on its list. And then Trump dropped a diplomatic grenade that confused everyone watching. He said Iran wanted to negotiate. "They want to make a deal," he told reporters, "but they're not ready to make a deal, in my opinion." Iran's foreign minister denied this immediately. But Trump went further, revealing something that the Pentagon had been quietly grappling with for days. American forces had, according to the president, already eliminated 2 successive groups of Iranian leadership. They had met with a third group attempting to open talks. And then Trump said something that stopped the room. "We don't know who their leader is. We have people wanting to negotiate. We have no idea who they are." It was an extraordinary admission. The most powerful military in human history had, through a series of precision strikes, created a leadership vacuum inside Iran so complete that the United States itself could not determine who was in charge on the other side of the table. Russia, watching from the sidelines, called for an immediate ceasefire and a return to negotiations. Moscow's voice in this particular crisis carried the particular weight of a country that has watched its own negotiating leverage grow as the West's attention and resources are pulled in multiple directions simultaneously. While Europe was being pressured to commit warships to the Persian Gulf, Russia's war in Ukraine had not stopped. German officials noted explicitly that rising oil and gas prices were filling Russia's war chest, even as Western economies absorbed the shock. The crisis in the Strait of Hormuz was not happening in isolation. It was being felt in every European budget, every Asian factory floor, every developing nation that imports oil and now faces record prices and constricted supply. China's position was perhaps the most strategically delicate of all. Beijing imports enormous volumes of Gulf oil, and a prolonged closure of the strait directly threatened its economic stability. Trump had called on China specifically to send warships. The Trump administration simultaneously suggested that Trump's planned visit to Beijing at the end of the month might not go ahead as scheduled, while insisting almost implausibly that this had nothing to do with pressure over the Hormuz situation. China, which has spent years cultivating relationships in the Gulf and positioning itself as an alternative to American-led security frameworks, now faced an uncomfortable choice: act alongside Washington and legitimize the very military campaign it had opposed, or refuse and watch its energy security erode week by week. Some nations began quietly choosing a third path. Turkey negotiated directly with Tehran to secure passage for its vessels. Iran confirmed it had allowed Indian ships through as a selective exception to the blockade. France and Italy were reportedly in discreet contact with Iranian officials about similar arrangements. The blockade, it was becoming clear, was not a binary choice between full closure and full openness. Iran was using selective access as a diplomatic instrument, letting some ships through, blocking others, signaling to different governments what the price of cooperation might be. The European Union's top diplomat floated the idea of an arrangement modeled on the Black Sea grain deal negotiated during Russia's war on Ukraine, a negotiated corridor, internationally guaranteed, that could allow oil to flow without requiring a military confrontation with Iranian coastal defenses. It was an elegant idea. But it required Iran to agree, and Iran, whose supreme leader had been killed, whose military had been significantly degraded, and whose economy was under maximum pressure, was not yet at a point of making concessions, or at least no one in Washington knew who had the authority to make them. Here is what is now at stake. The Strait of Hormuz is not just a trade route. It is a test of whether the post-Cold War international order, built on American military primacy and collective Western security frameworks, can hold together under pressure. Trump's demands have exposed the limits of alliance politics when trust has been eroded over years of coercion and contempt. The world's oil markets are in crisis. Iran is battered but not broken, still in control of one of the most strategically valuable geographic choke points on Earth. And the United States finds itself in the uncomfortable position of having started a war, eliminated a chain of Iranian leaders, and now admitting it does not know who to call to end it. The coming weeks will determine whether a negotiated pathway emerges from the rubble of Tehran's leadership structure, or whether the world's energy supply continues to bleed through a 21-mile gap in the Persian Gulf. One thing is already certain: whoever controls that strip of water controls the economic heartbeat of the modern world. And right now, no one is entirely sure who that is.